So look, thank you very much for joining us at the GES session as part of the Royal Economic Society's 3-day conference. And I understand there's been some fantastic sessions going on, both in plenary and also in the breakouts like this one. And we're delighted that you've joined us to find out a little bit more about economics in government. And I should start by saying that I am Sam Beckett. I am Deputy CEO at the Office for National Statistics, and I am also co-head of the Government Economic Service with Claire Lombardelli from the Treasury. And I am joined by Tom Aldred, who runs the GESR unit at the Treasury, and by Stephen Aldrich from DLUC, who is their chief economist and a big corporate leader in the Government Economic Service. And we also have Polly Rees, who is joining us too from the GES unit from the Treasury. So look, we're delighted to be here to share what's on our minds in this part of the profession. We are probably the largest employer of economists. So, and economics is incredibly important in the functioning of government and policy advice. So we'd love to tell you a little bit more about what we get up to and what is on our minds in terms of improving the profession in government. So with that, I will hand over to Tom.
Great, thanks very much, Sam. So I'm just going to share my screen. Let's just get that going. And I hope you can now see it. So as Sam said, my name's Tom Aldred. I work at the Treasury, where I head up the GESR team, and we look after the economics and social research professions in government. I'm double delighted to be here because I'm also a trustee of the RES. And I've been watching some of the other sessions that you've had so far, which have been really, really fantastic, really inspirational to see. So outline what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give an introduction to the GES, Government Economic Service. Sam and Polly are going to talk about diversity in the GES, what we know about our own profession, and also what our aspirations are and what we're doing. And Stephen's going to talk a little bit about how we collaborate with academics and how that academic government relation can work well. And then we've got some time for discussion as well at the end. So what I like, I've got a comms professional who works in our team, always says you should start by thinking about what you want the audience to know, feel and do by the end of the session. So what I want you to know is more about what we do, what economists in government do, how we recruit economists, and what we are striving for, and how we work with academics at the moment. I want you to feel that we're credible. I want you to feel excited by the prospect of working with us, and also excited about promoting the GS to your students, for those of you who are teachers. What would I like you to do? Well, I would like you to promote the GS to your students, and particularly encourage those from underrepresented groups to apply. So, first of all, the GS. So there are lots of economists in government, and if you look, the GES was founded in 1964, and there's been a story of growth since then. Now I've left the y-axis off the chart because this is historical data, and the data series don't always coincide exactly, but it has been a story of rapid growth, and we are now approaching 4,000 economists in government, and a lot of them are quite senior. So we have 4% of those are senior civil servants of one form or another. There are several permanent secretaries who started their careers in the GS, and indeed we have had at least 2 cabinet secretaries who started their life in the GS, Gus O'Donnell, Lord O'Donnell, and Jeremy Hayward. GS economists are in lots of departments. There's over 50 departments or agencies that are represented in the GES. You can see some of the biggest employers. Bayes is around 15% of our members. Treasury, another 10%. There are, I think, 4 or 5 that have more than 100 economists. And Sam and I were just chatting before this call started. The ONS is growing very rapidly as it recruits more economists. That means there's a lot of variety in what economists do across government. We've recently been putting together, refreshed our skills framework for economists in government. And one of the challenges is there's just so much that economists do in government, all sorts of different policy areas, but also using different tools and in working in different ways, sometimes within economics specialist units, more commonly with other analysts, social researchers, statisticians, data scientists, and others, and sometimes bedded out working with directly with policy teams. And all the economists that we recruit, they are employed by departments. They're not employed by a central economists unit, which means they have different terms and conditions depending on which department they belong to. Now, I think it's fair to say that economics is the dominant social science in government. It's been very influential, and that's partly why you see so many, relatively speaking, so many economists in this senior civil service. And I think this is one way of saying, it's a nice quote from Larry Summers, describes why economists have been so successful. Just let you read that for a moment. I think it's really it's a toolkit that you can apply to almost any problem, any policy issue, and it provides a tractable analysis, a way of thinking about the world. As long as we don't fall into the trap of thinking it's the only way to view the world and it is actually the truth, it's a very helpful tool for simplifying things. So, what makes for a good government economist? First of all, most importantly, something we test for when we recruit economists is the abilities, the understanding of the really fundamental principles around economics and being able to apply them to whatever the issue of the day is. And as you appreciate in government, new things are occurring all the time. Events happen and you've got to be able to apply your economics to them. It's important that economists have a toolbox of models, so they understand when different models are appropriate, what their pros and cons are, and really understand what the limitations are of the different models. And I saw actually Danny Roderick on one of the panels yesterday, and I know he's talked, read his book about having the right. Can't think of the name of it, but it's all about applying the right model at the right time. You need to be able to understand and interpret academic work, so we can critically evaluate the work that you are doing. It's really essential that economists can look for insights beyond economics in other disciplines, whether that's psychology, data science, statistics, science, and importantly to be able to communicate to non-economists. Now, in academia, sometimes the use of technical language can be a useful way of signifying understanding, but it's a surefire way to turn off ministers or senior officials who are not economists. It's really important that GS members can communicate their economics and the economic insights really clearly in a way that anyone can understand. I suppose before moving on, what doesn't make for a good government economist, or what is not necessary for a good government economist, is probably being able to derive OLS estimators from first principles, or being able to use really detailed algebra. It isn't that useful in a day-to-day context. In fact, I've certainly never had to use it in my 19 years in government. The GS has 5 different recruitment schemes, and we recruited about 400 people last year. We are currently going through a couple of big recruitment schemes. So we have 2 graduate schemes. One is the FAST stream, which you will probably have heard of, which is a centralized scheme that has various different professional elements to it, and it's really a sort of graduate development scheme. Then there is another one called the Assistant Economist Scheme, and this is, we test the economics in exactly the same way here. Something called the Economic Assessment Centre, where we test people's knowledge of economics, their application of it, and their communication of it. The fast stream has other elements where it's testing non-economics competencies, and those are less prevalent in the assistant economist scheme. Then we have two schemes for existing students. There is a sandwich or placement scheme where students will work 1 year in a department. And there is a summer scheme which lasts for 6 to 12 weeks. And then finally, there is the degree apprenticeship program, which has been running, I think, for 4 years now. We're just completing the assessment this year. There's around 60 people come in through that each year. That lasts for 4 years, at the end of which the person will have a degree. So why should your students join the GS? So it's a bit of a plug for you to promote it to your students. I mean, first of all, I think the reason that a lot of people go into look for a job in government is to make a difference. So to be able to apply the skills that you have learned to what are the most pressing issues of the day, which is a really important thing to do, and it's just really interesting. Just so many interesting policy questions to look at. So think of some of the most pressing issues over the last 10 or 15 years is the financial crisis and creating the furlough scheme. Economists have been right at the forefront of the response to those. Some of the longer term challenges, climate change, I think back to the beginning of my career when it was the Stern Review, which really set the foundation for a lot of climate policy ever since, which was at heart an economics review as it was led by Nick Stern. Biodiversity, there was a review last year led by Partha Dasgupta, and lots of work over the years on inequality too. It's also a way to apply some of the new tools of economics. So you can see that there's been widespread use of RCTs in development. DFID make a lot of use of those to evaluate their policies. There's increasing use of very large data sets. So for example, we give an award each year for the best use of economics in the GES, and the prize last year was given to a team who used a very big, I think it was the Leo data set, to look at what the long-term outcomes, labour market outcomes were of choosing different GCSE subjects and the grades that you got at those different subjects. I was utilising a very big long-term data set. And then there's also been quite a lot of application of behavioural economics in pensions, tax policies, and a lot of other areas. And there is also a huge diversity of roles. So I certainly, in my 19 years, have been in 10 different roles, can work in all sorts of different departments. There are lots of roles that are very technical. There are others that are more applying fundamental principles. And there's lots of specialisms that you can seek out if you want to. And there's also opportunities beyond economics. So people often move from economics roles to policy roles. I've done that myself, and go and do, it's the opportunity to do secondments in other organizations as well. So working in the civil service as an economist gives you a great opportunity to use your economics for good, but also to explore other opportunities as well. So that's sort of the end of that plug. I am now going to hand over to Sam for part 2.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. I will indeed, and I think you can probably move us on to the next slide more or less straight away. So what I would like to talk a little bit about is how we look in terms of our diversity. And that's because as a profession, we really want to improve our diversity. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that and then talk a bit about why it is important. It's a big part of the GES strategy that Claire and I are there to oversee and steer through to a successful place. So if Tom, I think you've got a kind of appearing one, but pop it all up there so as people can take it on board. So I'm going to kick off a little bit on the question of gender in economics. Now, 3 in 10 economics undergraduates are women, so significantly less than we would expect to be a representative number. And that's quite a well-known and disappointing statistic from a personal perspective. And there's lots of explanations that are put forward there around the curriculum being too abstract, too mathsy. But you know, some of these I think are red herrings, because in fact the proportion of maths undergraduates who are women is slightly better than for economics. In fact, only comparing, you know, if you look at the league tables on gender, only computer science and engineering as mainstream undergraduate subjects are worse than economics. So we really need to appeal to women as a subject. The physical sciences have done wonders over the last few years, and now the economics undergraduate proportion is about 43% women. So we can do better, and we are trying to do better. Now, there was a really good IFS study which looked at the effect of A-level economics on the pipeline to economics undergraduate study and onwards into careers. And what it showed was that 1 in 6 boys studies A-level economics, and 1 in 17 girls studies A-level economics. So that pipeline problem on gender is really very obvious when you take it back to the A-level level of study. There's also something there about socio-economic diversity in our profession. 1 in 5 independent schools students study economics, and 1 in 12 is the comparative number at state school. So, you know, we are at A-level, male dominated and private school dominated. And when you partner that with the fact that almost all economic undergraduates have done it after doing an A-level, then the A-level is part of the pipeline problem here. It's quite easy to see that sort of causation flowing through. So that takes you right back down the pipeline, doesn't it, about why the A-level is so unevenly distributed. There's probably something there about the teaching of economics in schools. So look, we're looking at this subject and trying to you know, formulate our strategy with this evidence in mind. Now, the GES does a wee bit better than the undergraduate number, with 35% of our membership are women. And the best of our schemes for gender balance is the degree level apprenticeship, at 40% women coming through to work in the GES. The others still are, you know, well, 32% for our assistant economist, so a little, you know, probably around the same as the undergraduate and representative, but disappointingly even under that at the fast stream level. When you compare our inputs in terms of that right-hand column to our membership at 35% female, actually, I think if we looked into those statistics, we'd be doing relatively well on the retention of women once they've arrived into the GS. But that is a story on women. We can do better, but there's a pipeline issue here, which means we can fight hard to get more than our fair share of female economics graduates into the GES. But for a sustainable position for the profession, we need to reach back further down the pipeline, and it will be a longer game. Moving on then to the next slide, which again I think we can show in one go, Tom. This is the story on race. Don't worry, go back. That's it. So the Royal Economic Society a couple of years ago did some really good work on racial diversity in the economics profession, and there were some things in that to reassure from a diversity and inclusion perspective. The RES found that the share of non-white ethnic minority academic economists doing research and teaching had increased a lot over the previous 10 years or so, and was actually higher than not only in UK academia generally, but also in the UK population. So actually, ethnic minority economists in academia were overrepresented compared to the working age population at large. But to come on to what the GES needs to do and work hard on, the RES looked at the student experience in searching for jobs, so the success of racial diversity into professional economist jobs. And what they found looking at our intake, now there wasn't a lot of data on this, and they came to us, we did have data on it, we're pleased to hear, but it wasn't a very encouraging picture. What it showed was that of those who passed the initial online test for the Fast Stream programme, only 8% of ethnic minority candidates ended up getting a job offer, compared with 22% of white candidates. So it's another story of how looking closely at the data and understanding the success rate of different represented groups is very important in understanding where your system is failing. So that is something that we have been focusing on and seeking to improve. But looking more broadly then to the GES membership as a whole, we have, it is 70% white, 12% Asian, 3% of mixed origin, and quite a large category which are not declaring. So there is definitely work to be done for the GES to become more representative, particularly when it comes to Black economists. We overrepresent white people and also underrepresent Asian people and those of Black heritage, as I've said already. Our entry routes from this perspective are a mixed bag. You know, I am pleased to say that over the 3 cohorts we've had in the GES apprenticeship space, we do better than our stock in terms of colleagues of a Black and Asian heritage, but more to be done there. And the other schemes potentially are even more of an issue in terms of improving our diversity. So moving on, the next slide, please, Tom. Why is diversity so important? Well, of course, it is a question of fairness, and I think in public services and in the GES, I feel quite passionately that it's really about democratic legitimacy as well, that we seek to be, strive to be representative of the citizens we serve. It's also very importantly, in a role like mine, about the competition for talent and making sure that we are we're not missing out on huge tranches of great talent because our systems and the way we present ourselves is working against our D&I improvement. So it's also about better economic advice that's more rounded and sees things from different perspectives and avoids groupthink. And it's ultimately then through to better policy outcomes for the citizen. Now, I like this OECD quote. I won't read it out, but I think it nicely covers those issues about trust and democracy, innovation, and improving the quality of public services and the experience of the citizen. Now, I think what I'm pleased to reflect on is how diversity is now part of the challenge of government and of economics. And just picking 3 relatively recent reports that really focus on the diversity issue just sort of shows how much profile this issue has got compared to, let's say, 10 years ago, when to be honest, for when we were talking about diversity, we were focusing more on gender than its broader perspective. So the first little picture there on the left is from the LSE's Public Policy Review. It's a really good read. I'm not saying it's accepted by the government. I should say that in my role at the moment, but it's just about how to illustrate how the pressure is on for us to do better. And this is about how the SAGE committee advising on the COVID response were underprepared and equipped to consider all the gender issues. Gender was a big part of the COVID pandemic. In those early days, men were more affected by the disease, women more affected by some of the non-pharmaceutical interventions like school closures, and women were, over 3/4 of frontline health services were provided by women. Now, the representation of women on SAGE just tells you about the profession. It ranged from 20 to 40% over that period, so not underrepresented in that sense. But were they really focusing on gender as an issue of the pandemic? Well, this report gives you a perspective on that, but it's holding our feet to the fire. Second one is from the Health Foundation about the differential death rates depending on the socioeconomic makeup of the area you live in. Some very stark statistics there about the 10% poorest areas. The under 65s death rate was 4 times higher than elsewhere. And the final tile there is a recent report from the government highlighting how public services needs to change to become more inclusive. Everything from rules and efforts around adoption to regulating artificial intelligence algorithms to avoid racist bias. So another symbol of just how much this is in the public discourse and how the government is having its feet held to the fire, and the GES shares that challenge. So where are we focusing our efforts? Next slide, please, Tom. Well, it is a big part of our GES strategy that Claire and I champion, which is committing us to becoming a community of greater diversity and inclusion. As I said, gender has long been part of the GES drive, but now we've broadened this to focus on race, on socioeconomic characteristics, on the other protected characteristic. I mean, one thing I think we've really discovered in this work is how far we've been able to get, even just by harnessing the ideas and energy across our present membership. People have been really leaning in and trying to help us get a lot better at this. And we're basing our actions around our 10-point action plan, which goes right through the pipeline of people's careers and of bringing people on to study economics. Next slide, please. So this slide, and you can click on, I think, Tom, to show all the bullets, please. A big part of our effort has been reaching into schools. Now, there are a lot of schools, and even though there may be nearly 4,000 of us, that is still hard to get that leverage really working for us. But it is important, and we're seeking to do what we can on that. We've really tried to change the culture in our profession and in the way we get together by making conversations more inclusive and making sure that we're collecting lots of data on this on our new website, reaching out to all our members, making them feel included to improve retention and networking and sponsorship. We've had a D&I audit to highlight the biggest issues for us, and I've talked about some of those. We've been working hard on our recruitment and making sure that we measure and respond to issues of concern there. We've set up a a shadow board for the GES board, which brings more of that diversity of thought into the room when we're thinking about the GES. And of course, making sure that we give good professional guidance on equality analysis right across government and across our broad community. Next slide, please. And we're not in this on our own. We've got lots of friends and allies out there, including, of course, front and centre there, the Royal Economic Society. We can do better together in terms of improving the profession, in terms of that pipeline, and also collaborate more as a professional economic community. Next slide, please. So I think we'll come to discussion at the end after Stephen has spoken, but really, look, what more can we do, I think, is the question here. And what does the evidence tell us works in terms of improving our diversity and inclusion? But I'll stop there and hand over to Stephen Aldrich, who's going to talk about the ways in which we're collaborating better. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sam. Delighted to be at the conference today. Just to reiterate, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephen Aldridge, Director of Threat Analysis and Data and Chief Economist at the long-titled Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. I'm going to say a bit about working with economists in government and indeed vice versa. By way of context, it might be helpful for me to say that I've got a team of around 250 people in the analytical community in my department. That's a mix of economists, statisticians, social researchers, operational researchers, and a range of data specialists. Of that 250, around 100 are economists. So those may sound like large numbers, and I guess in absolute terms they are. But my team provides ongoing economic and more broadly based analytical advice on every aspect of the department's business. So that includes housing and planning, building safety, homelessness and rough sleeping, net zero, levelling up, local government finance, communities and social cohesion, and much else besides. We also need to be ready to provide analytical advice at pace on new challenges as they come up, whether it's in response to the COVID-19 pandemic or most recently our humanitarian response to events in the Ukraine. We do a considerable amount of analytical and research work internally, but we also make a great deal of use of academic research. Indeed, we make use of relevant research and evidence wherever we can find it, not just in academia, but from think tanks, work centres, consultancies and other experts. Academia and other external sources help to improve our understanding of issues and their causal drivers. They provide invaluable insight, challenge and ideas, and they help to open up new avenues for solving economic and social problems or seizing new economic and social opportunities. So those academic and other external sources really matter to us, and I work hard to build and maintain my department's external links, though I'm sure there's much more that we could and should do. Like other departments, we publish a statement of our areas of research interest every few years. Our most recent such statement was published in 2018, and we're hoping to publish a much updated statement later this year. These statements are intended to provide research providers and research funders with a relatively detailed overview of our research interests. Inevitably, new research interests can emerge at any time, but these statements provide a good starting point if you want to get a handle on what are the sorts of interests a department has. What then are my department's current areas of research interest? They are many and hugely varied. Bear with me as I go through, but I think it might be helpful for me to just go through some of these sort of research questions that are at the forefront of our mind, to give you a flavour of the areas in which we really want to engage with academia and other sources of external expertise. So what are the key causal drivers of economic and social spatial disparities? What are the most effective interventions for improving subnational economic outcomes, raising living standards, improving well-being and restoring pride in place? All key themes of the Levelling Up White Paper. How should we go about delivering the missions in the Levelling Up White Paper? How best should we measure them, and how should we evaluate progress over time? What are the key drivers of housing affordability? How do we ensure the right housing is built in the right places and at the right time? What methods should we use to appraise and evaluate the impact of land use planning reforms on housing supply? What are the impacts and benefits of improving the quality of the housing stock? How can we more rigorously appraise the costs and benefits of building safety regulatory reform? How cost effective is the retrofitting of existing dwellings compared with other ways of reducing CO2 emissions? How should local authority capability, capacity and resilience be defined and measured? How do we go about measuring the performance of local public services? Does local authority spending on preventative services reduce spending on demand-led services? And what works in promoting greater community resilience? I mean, these questions literally scratch the surface in terms of the research questions my department is interested in. Hopefully, they give a flavour of what we're about, and each department will have its own set of questions and interests. We're open, I should stress, to others' views on what the key research questions are or ought to be. We don't have a monopoly of wisdom. The Levelling Up White Paper highlights, I think, what an exciting time this is for engagement between economists and analysts in government and economists and analysts in academia and beyond. The White Paper strongly emphasises the importance of data, monitoring and evaluation, our desire better to understand the drivers of the problems we face and what works in tackling them, and also a desire for more experimentation, piloting and trialling of potential solutions. That can't all be done by my team or the team in any department. We have to engage more widely. We pursue that engagement in a number of different ways: hosting regular economics and social research seminars, organising more in-depth workshops and roundtables on issues such as levelling up, local government finance and homelessness, commissioning research and engaging academic experts in our major research projects. But perhaps above all, what's most important is the building of networks of academic and other contacts and using those to support our work. But as in other things I've mentioned, I'm sure there's more we could or should do, and I'd be very keen to hear views. Most departments have directors of analysis, chief economists or equivalent senior analysts. Our contact details should be relatively easy to obtain. We can each discuss our research interests and perhaps offer practical support to academics wanting to address the sort of issues we're interested in, whether that's writing letters of support for new research proposals, connecting you with relevant policy officials, serving on advisory groups for your research projects, opening up access to data, and much more. We can also help in advising on how best to get the most policy impact out of your research, whether it's bringing out its relevance and robustness, making sure it's timely, connecting you with the right people, helping make sure that the findings can be readily understood. Examples of influential academic work are many, and in my area include things like the literature on spatial disparities, econometric modelling of the housing market, the economic literature on the drivers of productivity performance, research into the causal drivers of homelessness and rough sleeping. Indeed, any research that adds to our understanding of what works in any of our policy areas. So I've gone through quite a few things there. I've set out a few reflections on how we seek to engage with academia and how we might help academics engage better with my department and others. Very keen to hear views and to take questions. should I now hand back to you, Tom?
Yes, sorry, I was on I was on mute there. We have had 2 questions have come through. So the first one is on diversity, and second one on collaboration. So we'll start with the diversity one. Do you think non-disclosure of protected characteristics is indicative of some concerns around data collection? Should we push greater transparency around data handling as part of our D&I strategies at both GS and department levels? Sam or Polly, I don't know whether you'd like to answer that one.
Yeah, look, let me start off, and then I'm sure Polly will have some reflections as well. I mean, when you're trying to do the right thing, it's disappointing when people don't want to declare their protected characteristics. And I guess sometimes that comes from a sort of perspective of a conscientious objection on their part for whatever reasons that they have. And then it might also be a worry about privacy. Now, I think, to be honest, if in government, our handling of data is pretty careful and cautious, and we're fully compliant with GDPR, and we take things like that incredibly seriously because people trust us with their data, and if they didn't, we'd kind of be out of business. So I think it would be good if we could reassure new entrants that they could trust us with their personal data more, and I think we could be confident in that. So I would like to encourage more people to give us their data. Now, the issue, though, is that when you're dealing with inclusion, as in making things kind of mandatory for people, there's an inherent tension in that, I think. So, you know, aiming to ensure everybody fills in their protected characteristics and sort of forcing them to do it on a kind of entry into the profession, I don't think is the way forward. It's building trust. It's reassuring people that you want the data because you're trying to do the right thing. And it might well be about reassuring them that the data is only for those purposes and will be destroyed appropriately, and so on. I think transparency is a good way forward. It would be good for all of us to show our data in that sense of what is measured is managed, and I think, you know, that is a kind of message that we adhere to in the GES, which is why we've invested a lot in trying to improve our information here. What's the good news then? The good news is that another part of our strategy, which is making the membership feel part of a community and having a good website that works for them, is one route to sort of building that trust and that route to greater disclosure around our protected characteristics. What is a good rate that you are aiming for? Well, you know, we have a big agenda on improving our disclosure at the Office for National Statistics. We're very pleased if we hit like 85%. So, you know, we would like it to be higher, but realistically, we always get a proportion of people who you know, don't want to fill in those characteristics. And I think, you know, you have to have you have to respect that. Thank you.
Great. We have one more question around collaboration, which I'll come to Stephen on in a second. But just to say, if anyone else has got questions, this is the only other one we've got, so please do ask them. And also,
Polly, I don't know if Polly just had anything on the that she wanted to get across on the diversity side. Not to put you on the spot or anything, Polly.
No, not at all. Happy to. I think you gave a really good answer. I think the only thing that I would add is that it's a little bit of a historic battle in that the work that we're doing today is to try and convince people to trust us when the trust was lost a long time ago, we weren't the people that lost the trust. So you're kind of having to rebuild that from all of those historic things that kind of go with people's personal identity and how they feel about doing that. And the only way that we can really do that is just keep kind of demonstrating that we do keep their information safely. We are using it to try and improve things, and that we'll keep kind of making those actions to move forward. I think the only other thing as well is that we're learning a lot, particularly through the new website. So sometimes there might be things where people don't feel like they're able to fill in a particular category or tick a particular box, which is leading them to then go into kind of other or kind of preferring not to say. So the more we capture this information, the more we learn about what other options people might need. But yeah, it, like you said, kind of there's a limit to what we can do when we don't have the information. So the more that people feel that they can give us that information, the more we can do to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to say before we read out the next question is that I know there have been a lot of other sessions on diversity in the conference. If anyone wants to kind of share any of the findings from that or challenge us on any of those, that would be through the questions. That would be great. So the second question we have, which is for you, Stephen, says, what can academic researchers do to make our work relevant for policy and make it sure it's considered in policy making when it is relevant? And if we already had projects that we think are relevant to your department's area of interest, how can we make sure that your team sees it?
Good questions. I think number of elements to the reply. I mean, one level I would say focus on the policy priorities. Make it absolutely clear what the research is saying and why we should listen to it or act on it. Of course, in some cases, it may be that the research is not about the substance of an issue. It might be about analytical methods. We're often very interested in methods and methodology too. And again, it may be that the key is to explain why some new method is important and how it can deliver us better insights in the work we do. I'm not sure I would say necessarily that academic research always has to be relevant to policy, or at least relevant to today's policy concerns, because I'm very aware that the problems we're concerned with can change through time, or new insights, new approaches may change our understanding of what's driving our concerns or should be driving our concerns. So I'm very keen personally to be challenged by by work on upcoming issues or potential upcoming issues and different ways of dealing with them. But in all cases, the key is to explain as clearly as possible why we should listen to this research, especially given all the other pressures on us on a day-to-day basis. But I'm certainly really, really keen to receive and be challenged by the latest academic research. In terms of how do you contact, how do you make sure that teams such as mine see this work? Yes, that's a challenge. I would say though that we're pretty easy to track down. I think I've got a fairish presence on the internet and so on. Even if you don't know my name, you can track down who is the director for analysis in this and other departments and get in touch with me. And I'm really keen for people to do that.
Great, thank you. We have one more question that's come through around diversity of thought. So how do you ensure diversity of economic approaches in your departments, both in terms of school of thought as well as methodology? That's a good
Do you want,
question.
shall I kick off on that one? I mean, so just talking about the Office for National Statistics, because it's an interesting one here, because we're quite structured in the way we go about this. And I've worked in lots of policy departments over my long career, and you know, I haven't seen it done quite the way the Office for National Statistics sort of does it. So we have these user groups and expert groups where we invite users of statistics and academics to meetings where we present our work and our challenges and get them to be critical friends of what we are trying to achieve. And they will also give us insight into what else is going on in the academic community, in the think tank world, and things that with the best will in the world we might not have noticed or had the bandwidth to really engage with. We have got lots of these groups on almost every area of our output. However, if you look at the total membership of these groups, there's lots of overlap. And I think one thing I want to do is to try and broaden the diversity of our critical friends, because actually quite often when you're looking for particular expertise, you are going to the usual suspects a bit too much. So lots of common membership in these committees, but it's a very structured approach to trying to do it. The other thing which we have is the Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence. And this was a response to a big report by Charlie Bean 10 years or so, 5 years or so ago, which was about how the statistical system could improve to take account of data and the digital economy, but more cutting edge methods, and how this collaboration and diversity of thought approach could be sort of harnessed. And it created this group, the ESCO as we call it, Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence, which is an interface between the ONS and it's run for us by NISA, and they provide the interface between what the Office for National Statistics is doing and the research community that are interested in economic and social measurement. So we're quite structured about this. We could do better, because structures need to kind of evolve to stay diverse, I think. But it's quite an interesting approach from a government department, and not one that I was very familiar with until I arrived here a couple of years ago. But I'm sure Stephen has got other thoughts in this vein as well.
Yeah, so it's a good challenge, isn't it? I suppose we all like to think that we receptive to a diverse range of approaches and ideas. I think things that are important in our context are that we're very much driven by outcomes and results. So if there's a way in which we can better understand a problem or come up with solutions to a problem, then we're really open to whatever schools of thought or methodologies get us to that position. I think, as in so many other things to do with good performance, I think being open is very important. We're open to challenge internally from other departments and from outside, and we regularly engage and bring into the department a host of different academic speakers. I think one other thing that's quite important here is that though we're talking here about economic approaches, all of my economists work in multidisciplinary teams. So they're working alongside social researchers, statisticians, operational researchers, and others. And that's a great way of encouraging people in all the different social sciences to reflect on different approaches and what they can learn from each other. So openness, professional diversity, as well as the other sorts of diversity that Sam was describing, I think are pretty important.
Great. Some more questions have come through. To what extent are government economists, or the GES more generally, responsible for driving the data agenda within government? E.g. in terms of priorities for data linkage and sharing, and is there a way that academic researchers can usefully feed into this? I suspect Sam and Stephen, you both have something to say on this.
Indeed. If I'll kick off if you like. I think we're hugely important in terms of driving the data and the evidence agenda, within government. But as Stephen said, I think it's important to sort of think widely beyond economics to the kind of analytical professions and the analytical function in government. But I think we really see ourselves as the bastions of good evidence underlining policy, difficult policy questions, and that creating a good evidence base is all about the data and the breadth of that data and the quality and timeliness of that data. So we feel hugely responsible for this agenda. It's a very positive story in government at the moment. Honestly, this government is hooked on data. So it's a brilliant environment for us to work in and to encourage data ingest and engineering and infrastructure and linkage. And linkage is where the magic happens. So I absolutely love your question, Claire. How can academic researchers usefully feed into this? Now, obviously, there's a sort of supply and demand aspect to it. We have got a secure research service in the Office for National Statistics where you can come and play with our data. You get accredited to our aforementioned trustworthy point and looking after people's data. You get accredited and then you can come and work within this secure confine on some fabulously interesting data sets. Leo is a great example of the kind of data set that we are looking for, and we are trying to, or we're working with. What we're trying to do is create a platform right across government and more broadly for data linkage in the ONS. It's called the Integrated Data Service. You talk to me and find out more. But we would absolutely, we want to ingest data if researchers have got it so that others can use it. And it's also there for you to play with the suitable, accreditation and security protocols around it. But, it's we really see ourselves as driving this, and we're pushing on an open door with government. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, and just to emphasize a few points. One is, at least in my own department, I think it's fair to say that progress in data linkage and sharing has very much been multidisciplinary. The economists have been important, and I'll say a bit more about how, but my social researchers, my data engineers, no less critical to that. So it is in my view a multidisciplinary endeavour. Where the economists are important, I mean, there's three things I pick out. One is economists, really important source of demand for better data, and as economists we should all appreciate the importance of that. But then I think the economists really helpful in bringing a theoretical perspective to how we make use of the data when we've got it, rather than just data mining. We want a proper theoretical model to the results that we produce. And I think economists are really good at helping to deliver insight from data. We don't just want data, we can drown in data. We want insight and evidence. And I see data as a means to those more important ends of insight and evidence. Data is not an end in itself. In terms of how we involve academics, certainly on big projects where we're accessing and linking administrative data, then we will routinely have advisory groups and panels, and we will very much want to bring in academic expertise to support us in that context, especially in areas, some areas where the policy is quite potentially controversial. Academics can be absolutely invaluable in making sure that our methods are robust and that we're being as objective as we can be in the work we do. But I'm sure there are other ways in which we could be doing more to engage academia in that sort of work.
Great. Two more great questions to come in. So another question for Sam and Polly on D&I. Any tips on how to effectively communicate the need to set and meet D&I targets when presenting analysis and policy proposals to senior civil servants?
Well, there's a lot in there, isn't there? Good question. A couple of things, a couple of observations. The first is, I think, well, in a word, dashboards. So in terms of thinking about improving the diversity of the organisation, I think good evidence and dashboards on the things that you should be measuring and are critical to getting a grip on, improving your diversity. It is more about diversity than inclusion in the round, I think, the sort of dashboard space. But certainly, in the GES set a high bar in terms of, thinking about this from an analytical perspective and measuring it well. And, in my current job at the ONS, what we're doing is producing a diversity dashboard for relatively small operational units in the organisation. And, I'm afraid to say that leads to a bit of healthy competition in a kind of league table space, and, understanding where the best practice is in the organisation in terms of, building a diverse field for recruitment and promotion, because I think therein lies, a really important aspect of improving, not everything, but a very important aspect of it. Now, the point here, then the question sort of pivots to presenting analysis and policy, doesn't it? I think it is just incredibly important to pause and ask the question in kind of presenting advice to ministers and senior officials. Have we thought about this from a diversity perspective? Have we brought that diversity of people, place and thought to this policy question? And, there is a equalities impacts piece that is required if you're approaching kind of regulation or legislation, and that's sort of important impact analysis too that has to be done. But I think in a much more general sense, it is that question of stopping and thinking about whether we've thought about this through all the angles. And I think that example of the SAGE committee just shows you how much expertise there is needed in thinking about all the diversity issues around a topic. So yeah, I think, pause for reflection. Are we all just drinking the Kool-Aid here, or have we challenged this, looking at it through different lenses in terms of people, place and thought? And I think some of those sort of famous blunders of governments around the world quite often come down to a kind of groupthink issue, don't they? So I think taking diversity seriously is quite important in avoiding those. Thank you.
Polly, have you got anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I've got a few thoughts, if that's okay. I think the first thing to say is that communicating any type of kind of diversity and inclusion information is going to be really hard, because a lot of the time it's going to have kind of big sways in what you're doing, or to make an impact you're going to have to do something that's probably quite difficult. So recognizing that to kind of begin with and thinking about how you kind of convey that is quite important. there's a few kind of tips that I'd suggest, and I'd say that, to be honest, in our team we probably don't always get these right either, but they're kind of good things to have down. So one is use best practice. So we always try and use the ONS harmonization stuff when we're collecting D&I information, and that just means that we can kind of compare it against all our different schemes and things like that, as well as the membership. Ask lots of questions and think about whether you're asking the right questions. So I think something in the team that we've kind of done recently is really think about who is in that BAME category and breaking that down and thinking a lot more about what we should be doing for Black heritage candidates, and that's around kind of asking the right question and making sure that we know exactly what we're looking at. When it comes to kind of presenting that data, I think for diversity and inclusion, you want to be thinking about telling a little bit of a story and making sure it's relevant. So I previously worked on universal credit and often found that when we kind of broke things down and went through what that was, the same information but for each individual rather than showing it on a graph or a chart, people seem to kind of understand how that kind of worked through a little bit better. And there was also a really good example recently where the fuel prices were being communicated to a minister, and the Economist worked out kind of the average increase in price based on a Volvo or something that was kind of used as the proxy for the average family car, which I think is a really interesting way of just making that information relatable and understandable, and just making sure that people really understand. The other part of the question asks about targets, and again, targets are really, really difficult. The one thing that I would kind of really press on targets is if you want to kind of set targets and implement targets, you need to kind of explain how we're also going to meet those targets. Targets are often set and then assume that means that we'll just gravitate towards them. So if you do want people to kind of buy into your targets, you need to really think about what you are going to do to move towards them.
Great. So 2 more questions. So there's quite a detailed question here about COVID. Given that COVID seems to be here to stay, do you think it would be possible to combine anonymised health outcome and income administrative data? I've got a research idea on the impact of sick pay policies, but it seems impossible to find admin data with both. Anyone on the panel have any suggestions on that one? Is that too detailed for us?
This is Stephen. That data does exist, and I would say what you're seeking to do, Rika, is possible. The challenge, particularly in relation to health data, is finding the necessary legal gateways to make the data accessible. That's a challenge my own department has faced in wanting to evaluate some of the impacts our programs have on health outcomes, for example. But what you're proposing, the data exists to do what you're suggesting here, and it could be done. There are those important things in hand, and it may be that Sam might want to say a bit about things like the integrated data service and platform and the secure research service in the ONS. Potentially, these are things that could make this sort of work much easier and much more feasible in the future.
Brilliant.
So thank you. Thank you. Well, just, I mean, it sounds like a really interesting idea. I'm jumping to conclusions potentially here, but my guess is you're trying to get at whether generous sick pay enables people to stay at home and therefore not get sick. So that's been an interesting and heated policy debate, hasn't it? So I think that does sound really incredibly interesting. I mean, you know, very happy to offline find out whether there's any mileage in anything that is on this, you know, secure research service that we have already. But I honestly don't know. I mean, the other departments to talk to about would presumably be DWP so on. I'm not sure if we can help, but I like where I think you're coming from on the question. It's very interesting.
Great. This is a great question. For all the panel, do you feel that your advice as an economist is influential in key policy areas? My experience as a public sector economist outside the UK, there's been a lot of work goes into providing rigor advice, but ultimately most of it goes nowhere for political reasons. Sam and Stephen, I'm sure you've got a lot of history to draw on there.
It's a kind of what would I say? Come the revolution sort of question, isn't it? Look, I mean, we have a kind of mantra about, you know, we as civil servants advise and ministers decide. So of course, you know, I think our long experience combined in providing policy advice is the fact that it can get ignored for other reasons, but it's very important that it's there. It's very important that it's given due consideration. So the fact that you get a different outcome than the one you advised, I don't take as meaning that the work on the advice and the evidence was nugatory. It's really important, and it's perfectly proper for ministers to say, you know, I know that is what I would do if I was looking at the economics, but, you know, there are other issues here, let's say around, you know, national identity or our culture or things that you're not taking full account of, that mean I'm going to take a different decision. And very often you have exactly that conversation with the minister, and those are fine, and you walk away feeling heard, and you feel like it was worth making sure that the decision was taken in the light of the full kind of facts and analysis and so on. It is a bit frustrating, you know, and I won't go on about it because I'm sure Stephen's got better examples. But I often reflect on my 30-year career in government and some, and think that actually a lot of what I've done isn't building things and changing things on the ground; it's stopping things. So you know, I did a lot of work and thinking about credibility of fiscal policy in government management. And one of my proudest things was being a big part of setting up the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is still there. It's a concrete thing that I can point at and think, yes, I saw that through to fruition. But a lot of what you do is actually providing advice that just gives people pause for thought. It stops things, or it was important to have so that the decision was taken in the light of all the evidence. It would be lovely to have a kind of trophy cabinet, wouldn't it, of our careers in economics, so we could sit up all the things that one could point to and say, I did that, I did this. But so much is the empty cabinet of all the things you stopped. So I do often reflect on that. But I'm sure Stephen brings a perspective to this question as well.
I totally agree with that, Sam. I mean, one thing I would say, and this is something I often say to my team, because I think it's important. I sometimes say to them, remember that we live in a democracy and not a technocracy. So, of course, we enormously value evidence, but in a democracy, political values and public opinion also have their place, and they're not necessarily in the same place as where the evidence points. That doesn't mean that we should give up, but it does mean that we need to be all the more effective in making the case for application of the evidence. I'm often influenced too by something that Keynes said in his general theory, where he wrote with confidence that ultimately it's ideas and not vested interests that will come through, and I really believe that in the medium to long term, I do believe the truth will out, and therefore we've got lots to be optimistic about. And to give two examples of areas where I think economic and advice and analysis has played an important part recently, I would cite first of all the Levelling Up White Paper. Whatever you may think of the policies in there, I think most people believe that the GES and others provided a really excellent analysis of the issues. I mean, others on this call may disagree, but it's had a very good reception. And ultimately, the quality of that economic and analytical advice, in my view, will win through. At a more detailed level, and I don't suppose most people will be much aware of this, my own team has done quite a bit of work to evaluate the impacts of different homelessness interventions, and actually has found them to be pretty effective when rigorously evaluated. And that's meant that we've been able to better make the case for continuing those programs, for example, in the spending review, and been more confident in arguing that those interventions will lead to better economic and social outcomes for the people concerned. So I can certainly give examples of where I believe economics and analytical advice has had positive outcomes.
I'm reminded of we had Jason Furman come and talk to at the GS conference last year, who was the chief economic advisor to Obama, and he talked about sowing the seeds, pulling up the weeds, and watering the plants, which is broadly what you have said. But sowing the seeds, coming up with new ideas to achieve the president's objectives. A lot of the value was pulling weeds, getting rid of terrible ideas, and then watering the plants. And I can't quite remember exactly what that was, but I think it was sort of helping things along that are already going well, sort of encouraging them. So let's just see. I think we've got time for. Let's make this one the last question, which is like a detailed follow-up. So, on a different note, I agree with the point that there's a lot of appetite for making decisions on evidence from data in government. However, I've also noticed a certain skepticism among non-analysts about results from a data-based model, like a gravity model. Any tips on how to engage with them? So I suppose it's a bit about communicating with non-economists and how we make sure that we're not talking past them.
Yeah, look, it's difficult, isn't it? I think I always focus on the intuition, not the model, if you like. So you get a set of results. It's important to be able to explain what your model is doing in simple language. And then you need to set out the results, and then you need to explain why these results make sense, the kind of intuition. It's really tricky. I mean, this is exactly the sort of nub of what we do in terms of, applying methods to problems and then communicating that to the inexpert, time-starved colleague or minister. So be wary of the black box model, because people that you're trying to convince will be rightly skeptical of all advice that they don't sort of understand, and they should be wary. So and that's why they kind of are where they are, because they have always been wary. So I think, don't expect that something impressive sounding like the gravity model, which I'm quite familiar with myself, is going to kind of win you a sort of, they're not going to be in awe of that. They're going to be instantly skeptical. So you need to sort of say, this is what this model does, and be humble about it. You say, it takes the data and it takes out this effect and it takes out that effect, and what's left is, what we're trying to tell you about trade, let's say. So you kind of have to explain in a simple way what your model is doing and its limitations and its pluses. Then you show the results and say, look, this is interesting. And then you explain why those results might be a sensible reflection of what's actually going to happen, or what you've seen happen. So I think the intuition is really important, and beware the black box. Nobody is in awe of that sort of technical obfuscation, if you like. That just makes people more skeptical and not more trusting. And I think that is the sense in which that sort of like sense that the era of the expert was over, which has not proven to be true at all. That's the element of truth in that. Is that you can't expect anybody's blind faith in your models if you can't explain to me why they make sense and what their limitations are. Thanks.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Giving people the how and why is really important. I also wonder whether there's some things we might learn from behavioural economics here, believe it or not, in dealing with this sort of skepticism. Because one thing I notice is that policymakers, people running public services, can become quite attached to the things they're doing now. So if you like, there's status quo bias, and if you tell them that there's some evidence that what they're doing isn't working, they find that quite hard to accept, because they become quite attached to the things they're doing. And so I think there's some important issues here around how we can create more of an environment of experimentation and trialing, which means that we can move on when we find something isn't working more easily, and then the advice that comes with that might be more readily accepted. But I've been quite struck in a number of different contexts where we've come across evidence, or there's evidence from what work centres or elsewhere, that something isn't working or won't work, and it can be very hard to get some people to buy into that. And it's because there is this, I think, fundamental human attachment to the things that they are working on and are doing, and we need to remember that.
Great. I think we have finished all our questions, and it's 5. We're about to run out of time as well, so I think we should probably wrap up there. I don't know if anyone's got any closing words, but thanks to everyone who attended. We can't see who you are, but we know there must have been some of you because you've had us some questions. So thank you very much for coming, and thanks to Sam and Stephen and Polly for joining me on the panel. Anyone want to add any closing words?
No, just like to add my thanks to everyone who came. Good session, lively questions, and a pleasure to be part of your great conference. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you very much for involving us, and really good questions, thoughtful questions.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much, everybody, and have a nice evening.